All right. Okay. Good. Hi, everyone. My name is Sascha Lusiak. It's the first time I'm here on the conference, and it's been great so far. So I want to take the opportunity to introduce the Joystick driver. I don't know if many people have heard of it or ever used it. I think it's a pretty small input device for special cases. Yeah, so I want to give you an idea of what it is about and maybe give you some ideas of what you could do with other input drivers. First of all, what it's not, the joystick input module has nothing to do with games under X. So I find a lot of people who suggest that if you want to play a game in X, you need this joystick input driver, which is a common misconception. It's an input module to handle classical joysticks, and what it can do is it takes the joystick events and it creates X events. So it creates pointer movement, and it can also create like key events from the actual joystick. Yeah, so what it's about, it's you can control the cursor with the joystick. Yeah, I'll give you a short introduction about joysticks. I go a little bit into detail what the state of the driver is, the module, and about future ideas. The idea for me to use a joystick was basically I had the device and I wanted to use it as a cheap remote control. So I wanted to like sit on my couch and control a movie. Because of course a couch is not very suitable for a mouse or a keyboard, unless it's a Bluetooth keyboard and far away. But I wanted to use a joystick because I had it, and I thought it's a cool idea to just sit there and handle the thing. To control music, for example, if you're far away, depending on what kind of device you have. Another idea would be to use a joystick to integrate it into kiosk systems, like you have an embedded computer that's very in rough environment, so you don't want like to have a mouse that can be stolen or people put chewing gum into the mouse so it doesn't work anymore. So it would be a nice idea to have a solid hardware box with a joystick which can be put outside. Another popular target for the joystick module was Xbox. If you have Linux on the Xbox, you usually already have the joystick, which is very rich with features, but you don't have a keyboard or a mouse. Linux on the PS2, and another example is like the Steam system. They came out with this new idea, Steam Big Picture, so they actually want to move the Steam gaming platform into the living room where you want to play games but you do not have access to a keyboard or a mouse. So what they actually do is they create a user interface based on a joystick. Of course, they're not using the joystick input module, but it's for the same purpose. So the focus of my input module was on classical joysticks, which usually have a lot of axes and a lot of buttons. Like that's my joystick. Actually, I bought for this module. It has 6 axes, so 2 analog sticks and a D-pad, and 10 buttons. So I was curious what to do with these buttons and with these axes. What some joysticks have is force feedback. This one doesn't. Force feedback is a nice idea. Like you could actually give feedback to the user, which is kind of new, I think. I'll talk about it later. So the joystick input module. If you attach a joystick to a normal Linux box, you get an FDEV kernel module, and we already have the FDEV input module for X. But what this module does, it tries to map everything directly. So whatever the kernel tells what the input device can do, it tries to map it to actually X events. It actually works with joysticks, but since joysticks send out absolute axis events, it's kind of useless to have an absolute pointer position according to where the X is. So apparently what I want to have with the joystick is I want to have a transformation from what the joystick state is to a series of X events. So I put a lot of thought into mapping, like acceleration themes for if you put the joystick to the left, you want a constant movement. So actually what you get with the X events is a lot of, it's based on timings and time. So when it comes to testing, for example, it might be important to have some time. Like Peter was talking about feeding events. The events you get from the module have little to do with what the device is actually doing, but has a lot of to do with timings. Like if you put the joystick to the left, and then in 1 second you get a series of events. So it would be interesting to measure those in the testing framework. Joysticks are, these days, they are USB usually and plug and play, which is very easy, and you get an FDev device in Linux, or the legacy device would be a joystick, a JoyDev device in Linux. In BSD, you usually have the USB HID devices, which is pretty generic. It's like the FDev, sort of. And I think that's FreeBSD only. You also have the joystick compatible device from Linux. So you actually in FreeBSD you have the same device, so you can use the same programs. The joystick input module uses a very thin abstraction layer to use whatever the kernel gives you, and then has a big transformation layer on top of that. So what the module has right now, it supports FreeBSD, BSD, and Linux systems. A lot of thought went into mapping, like what do you want to do, what do you have. The joystick I showed, it has analog access, so they have a wide range of 30,000 plus and minus. It has a D-pad, which only has 3 states, like minus, 0, and plus. And you can also think of the axis as being absolute. You can map these events to pointer movement. Of course, that's the obvious thing. I want to move the cursor to the left, to the right. Of course, I want to create scroll events, and that's something cool. You have an axis, and you can actually map it to scroll down and up by moving the axis. What was pretty difficult to do is I wanted to create key events or key sequences. Like if I press a button on the joystick, I would like to generate like Alt-Tab to switch windows. So the joystick would actually act at both as like a mouse device and a keyboard device. The module also sends out raw evaluators, which is, I think, pretty recent in X Input 2. I didn't see any use of it yet, but actually if you use a module, you can use GIMP, and you can configure GIMP to like take an axis as a pressure and one axis to have some movement of the cursor. You can map buttons of the joystick to a lot of different things, like to pointer clicks, to pointer movement actually. So you can say one button moves the pointer to the left. As I said, you can create key sequences like Alt-Tab, which was pretty difficult in the beginning, because if you have a keyboard and a joystick to create keyboard events, there has not really been a distinction between these two. So in the beginning, I had problems with auto-repeat, that the auto-repeat of the keyboard applied to the joystick, which wasn't very useful, but this situation improved a lot lately. And one big problem was the keyboard layout, actually. Because of from the input module, I did not have access to the user space, to the client space of keyboard layout and keyboard events. For me, it was pretty important that the joystick input module was like a temporary thing to use. Like I want to use it as a cursor, but then I want to decide, okay, now I want to play a game. So actually, the joystick module would interfere with my game. So I added an option to disable most of the drivers, so I can like mute it, so I can still play a game, and when I'm done, I press a button, and then the functionality comes back up again. It has hot plug functionality through UDEF and xocconfd, which is pretty cool. It allows you to create specific configurations for different joysticks. Every joystick is different in what it can do. It does not actually grab the device. I think it doesn't even have the possibility to grab the FDev device, meaning you can play games because the events get fed to different applications. You should, of course, watch out then if you have more devices, like the joystick and the FDev device. If you hot plug both of them, of course, you get double the events. Input properties, pretty recent. I think the joystick driver would benefit a lot from dynamic configuration, like maybe you have an application where you want to control your music player, or you want to control your your movie player, so you would like to have different profiles, like to reconfigure the joystick on the fly to say this button means forward, this button means play and pause. What would be very useful is a front end to configure these things. So right now I think X input is the only really useful front end for input properties right now. The input module is usually installed unintentionally by the user, like they think, oh, joystick, X, cool, let's install it. And if the distribution enables it by default, by having a default configuration, then the user might get confused, why is it moving the mouse? So when I actually search for the module, what people think about it, I mostly find, how do I deinstall it? Or what's happening here, my joystick moves the cursor, I don't want that. So the default should be that the user is like sensible about it, like it should be that disabled, so it has to actively enable it, or that there's a confirmation box like, I found a joystick, do you want it to control the cursor or do you not want to? Yeah, like that would be a thing from the desktop environment, like new joystick detected, what do you want? One thing is that there is actually no reasonable default configuration. I do have a default configuration in the module which applies to my device, but since there's so many different use cases for joystick, it depends a lot of what does the user want to do with it. Yeah, like a configuration wizard for the configuration. Yeah. So one difficulty was that the X server right now, it clearly separates between pointer and keyboard, and obviously the joystick is neither nor. So what the joystick driver, the input module had to do, it had to create two devices, one for pointer events, one for keyboard events. Had a lot of trouble in the beginning when the separation wasn't so obvious, so I tried to create key events from a pointer device and everything crashed. So it makes it kind of not so transparent to the user, why do I have two devices? And the input property, for example, they go on the pointer device while the keyboard layout applies to the keyboard device. So configuration isn't very easy. It seemed like the input system isn't really made for these hybrid devices yet. So maybe there's some plans. Another problem was with keyboard. The user usually cares about the keysims, like a human representation of what the key should do, like space or return, while the input module only creates scan codes from the keyboard. And I see you want to usually map a keyboard layout to a keyboard, what you have, so the physical thing doesn't change. I had kind of trouble to think of a way to map the actual function to the joystick keys if the joystick only can create the scan codes. So it would be like a user space. You could create a keyboard layout to the joystick, which I think isn't really that dynamic. I think keyboard layouts are a pretty static thing in the system. Maybe there's some infrastructure to have actually a user program create a keyboard layout on the fly. So the way it works is actually it's a pain in the ass to configure. So you have to create scan codes, and you have to know what scan code actually create what keysims. Like if you want to create the Alt-Tab sequence, I think you have to create scan codes 23 and scan code whatever. So it needs another step for the user to figure out how to actually create certain events. What is possible right now that's pretty great, it's auto-repeat, so you can configure a different auto-repeat for the physical keyboard and for the joystick. The module creates raw valuators, so valuator 0 and 1 is usually reserved for the pointer movement, but it also allows you to have one valuator per axis actually. So as I said, you can use it in GIMP to say I have 6 axes, I want to have pressure, I want to have, I don't know, what you could do with it. Like you actually could create XI2 applications to use all of the joystick features. I think it's less useful for games. Most games directly access the joystick because apparently you don't want a game to rely on the joystick input module. The focus is clearly on Linux. It's the most prominent system on desktops or on like console systems. It does have a FreeBSD backend or BSD backend, but right now like Solaris or different platforms just are not attractive for it. I would like actually console systems to use the module more, but I think what most Xbox systems do, like Linux and the Xbox, they use a kernel module to create mouse events, and then in user space you have access to a mouse event, or they use a user space program to map between the joystick and the mouse events so that you actually have access to the mouse events from non-X applications like Midnight Commander on the virtual terminal. Yeah, what's not covered is the Wii Remote and the Kinect, which is very much different from the joystick. So the module really only covers classical joysticks because of the transformation. But what would be really cool is like a Kinect input module. I don't think you can map it to a... You can't call it a joystick, so it needs to be a totally different module. But it would be pretty cool to move windows or to have multi-touch in, I don't know, space. Force feedback is one thing. I think that's not really possible right now. Apparently you would want events from the toolkit, like when I'm hovering a button, maybe I would like the joystick to vibrate, so I feel, oh, here's a sensitive area I can press. So there would need to be infrastructure from the client side to the input module side. I think there used to be one way to send feedback to the input device, I think, which was the key bell. I think the keyboard had a bell. I'm too young to remember that, but I've seen the infrastructure in the driver that actually the user space made a beep, and the beep appeared on the keyboard instead of right now the PC speaker in the system. Yep. Sorry?
SR33, there was a lovely little brass bell with a little dinger. So when you hit the control G code, it actually ran the solenoid, and you got a ding. And of course, the VS100 terminals are the ones that had the beeper inside the keyboard. That also did the key click. So when you press the key, it would emit a click from the speaker, or when you sent a code. So it really was physically in the keyboard.
Yeah.
Which is why the feedback is in the keyboard. Yeah,
but I think
crazy.
that feature gets removed. Like, I don't see any more keyboards having actually a feedback to the user.
I think we need to bring the little brass bells back.
Yeah.
We need to go there. I need a little brass bell on my laptop here.
So, I seem to remember that a number of years ago, Logitech made a couple of mice that had
right.
little vibrate thing in them that could, and on the Windows driver, when you like moved over window boundaries, it would kind of thunk as you crossed over the edges. Did we ever have anything in X for those? Could
X input 1 had a couple of feedback classes, string feedback, int feedback, a couple of other ones, LED feedback, and so on and so forth, that could be used for force feedback. They never made it into XI2, mainly for a lack of interest. No one ever really complained to me either. So it's still, given that all XI2 devices can also be controlled through XI1, you can do that right now. You just have to convince the toolkit guys to do so.
Yeah, so I like a device personally, so I never put any interest, like manpower into getting it to work. So if it's possible, I just probably need the events, or we need an infrastructure, common infrastructure from toolkits to like generate common events like, I don't know, hover, button, and click. Okay, the module is pretty much well, feature complete. It has been pretty quiet around it lately. Most of the properties are implemented to reconfigure the device on the fly. So far as I know, X input is the only real front end to support input properties, or at least to be able to talk to the joystick module to reconfigure it on the fly. That's why the driver has the possibility to deactivate itself, so at least you can play games while you use it. And Well, front end would be cool. Yep, that's it. Any more questions?
You mentioned the Wiimote and the Kinect. I'm basically interested in the Wiimote. Has there any work been done related to it, or have you personally tried it out?
I don't have these devices, and I have no idea if somebody made it actually to work yet.
A couple of years ago, there was at least one user space library that could talk to the Wiimote. I'm not sure if there's a kernel driver or something yet. There used to be an X driver as well, which was more written as a joke, literally, because I wrote it. And so it's definitely integrating the Wiimote would be possible through just another backend, if it's not already done by the kernel somehow anyway.
Well, I think the Wiimote exposes much more information, so you would like to use it, like acceleration and stuff, so you would think probably of different transformations than I have in the classical joystick module.
You already have arbitrary axes on any joystick, more or less anyway, so the Wiimote just adds different arbitrary axes that you have to map. It gives you the IR, you can either have the absolute IR axis for controlling the pointer, or you use the acceleration. So it definitely, the only thing you'd need here is either different backend for the client-side stuff, and the rest is just configuration again.
Right.
I just got one more comment for features or future features. Can you add to the man page a section saying that the purpose of the joystick module? Because right now the man page just says it's a module for joysticks. It doesn't say any of the stuff that you explained, why it's actually there, what it isn't, which I suspect is where a lot of the user confusion comes from.
Right. Well, most users actually don't even know about it, so they don't even know they have it installed. They just install all modules, and apparently things happening. So they wouldn't even know which man page to open, I guess. But right.
And last comment, because he said XKB reconfiguration at runtime, Dirk Wallenstein wrote some tool that allows you to remap all the keys on the fly and not just apply a layout, but actually apply specifics. You just have to dig it up on the Xorg devel list.
Okay.
Anyone? Okay, thank you very much for your talk. We will now have a coffee break. And Luke also wants to make some announcements regarding the weekend event and